Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So 2022 is done. It's dusted, I'm sick of looking at it, and so are you. And it's time to move on to 2023, which is shaping up to be one of the best years in video games, potentially of all time, assuming, of course, that all of the games that we think are coming out in 2023 actually, come out, unlike last year. But I thought it would be important to start this year on a positive note, and with that in mind, I think it's time for the second annual Daniel Awards, where I give fake awards to the real things I loved in the previous year. Now, keep in mind, of course, that I am but one man, and I do work full-time, so these are only the favorite things that I actually engaged with this year. If your favorite book or TV show or movie or game or whatever does not appear on this list, it's either because I didn't like it, or more likely because I didn't experience it. So, with that out of the way, let's get into it. The first award I want to give out today is for my favorite manga of 2022, and I've read quite a few new manga in 2022. Eagle Eye Weebs will of course notice that my manga shelf up here has changed dramatically over the last 12 months, and these are just the ones I choose to display. There's a whole nother bookcase over here full of manga that I just can't put over here, or it would be manga from top to bottom, and I have other things that I would rather display. I started Blue Lock last year, which was phenomenal. I started Blue Period, which the art was gorgeous. I started My Hero Vigilantes, which I think in many ways is better than the core My Hero series. But this award absolutely has to go to Kaiju number 8. And the reason for that is because from volume 1, I was immediately stuck in this feeling that Kaiju number 8 is going to be the next big thing. It has all the trappings of something that's going to just absolutely explode, and it's such a good manga, and it's going to be such a good anime. They announced that it's going to start in 2024, which I'm really excited for, but right now it's still this very small thing, right? I haven't met basically anybody else who has already read this, which, to be fair, there's only 4 volumes out in the West, so that's not all that surprising. But it's absolutely phenomenal. It's about this kind of schlubby guy called Kafka, and he lives in a version of Japan that is constantly under attack by kaiju. And he wants to join the defense force of Japan to try and fight the kaiju back, but he always continued to fail the entry exams, and so instead he wound up with the job of cleaning up the remains of the kaiju after the good soldiers actually did defeat them. Because in this universe, they're not fighting it Pacific Rim style with giant robots, they're fighting them just on foot with like guns and swords, which is incredibly badass. But he one day ends up getting effectively superpowers that allow him to transform into a human-sized kaiju and live out his dream of joining the defense force, and it just sort of goes on from there. I'm not going to spoil too much about it, but it's an absolutely fantastic read. Kafka is this like kind of dumb, funny protagonist, and they actually play it really well, where it doesn't get annoying like a lot of other dumb protagonists tend to get in shonen anime or manga. And when you pair him with his sort of right-hand man, Reno, who's this like kind of cool, collected, like straight man, they have this odd couple sort of thing going on that works really well. And then you throw in characters like Kikoru, who's this like just massively badass girl with a huge axe, and people like Mina, who's got this huge gun and a tiger, and Hoshina, who's a swordsman. They just make such a great team so quickly that I have become invested in these characters in a way that I haven't been invested in characters that I've spent many, many more chapters with. And I think that that's really commendable. I think the writing of this story, so far at least, has been absolutely phenomenal. It's been really funny, but like has that right balance of like comedy and drama. And the art is just absolutely beautiful. There's been a couple of splash panels that pop up every now and then that just blow me away and just get me so amped. So best new manga of 2022 has to be Kaiju number 8. If you're not reading it, you should be, because it's gonna be huge. And now for my favorite movie of the year, and this hands down has to go to The Batman. This movie is not just immediately the best Batman movie of all time, but quite possibly one of the best comic book movies of all time. I would have to look at a list and really think about it, but it's absolutely up there, right? Its cinematography is just gorgeous from start to finish, from the beginning where all the villains are looking into the shadows of Gotham, afraid that Batman might be hiding in them, all the way to the end with the flood and the way that they handle the light there. It's just gorgeous. The soundtrack, the sound design, the way the Batmobile sounds is so powerful and so scary, and it's amazing. The way that they play with sound in that fight that happens at, I think it's supposed to be the Iceberg Lounge, the fight that happens in the club where they like mute all the hits, but it's so good. Just every single moment of this movie is phenomenal, except for that one scene where they stick the Joker in for no reason, which hopefully they won't follow up on that, because that was really bad. But every other second of this movie was amazing, especially when you consider the acting that was put in. Colin Farrell's portrayal of the Penguin in this is my new favorite comic book villain live action portrayal, easily. Like, I know a lot of people are gonna be like, what about Heath Ledger's Joker? What about Heath Ledger's Joker? Colin Farrell's Penguin, all day, every day. Fight me in the comments right now. Paul Dano as the Riddler did an amazing job. Jeffrey Wright as Gordon is right up there with Gary Oldman for me, just absolutely killing it. Robert Pattinson's Bruce was really, really good. He didn't have a ton to play with in terms of like emotional range, but he showed it all on his face, right? He didn't necessarily have to say so many things, because Robert Pattinson, it turns out, and I would have never thought this back when I was an edgy teenager and hating on Twilight, is actually a really good actor. Just the things that he's able to say without saying it are amazing. Just way to go. The writing is so good, and they finally understand that Batman isn't just this brooding, scary monster. He represents hope for the people of Gotham. He's the person who's going to save them when everything else goes wrong, right? He is the hero of Gotham City. And for Matt Reeves to know that in order to sort of break fans' mentality of thinking that he is just this big scary Batman into knowing that he's an actual hero who does good, he showed sort of that same mentality switch over in Batman himself. They showed Bruce Wayne, Robert Pattinson, have that realization that he has to also be this beacon of hope. If he wants to really stand for change and like make a positive impact on Gotham, then he has to be a person that the people of Gotham can hope shows up and saves them, can be, he has to be a hero. And for him to have that realization as a way to show the fan base, who is probably very used to him not being that very well, it was such a smart choice. Matt Reeves is a phenomenal director. He did such a great job with this movie. I cannot wait to see the sequel. It's the best movie I saw this year. Now for my favorite TV show of 2022, and this was a really hard category to pick. 2022 was an incredibly strong year for TV, from Rings of Power, which was one of the most beautiful and well-acted TV shows I thought I would ever see, and got way too much hate for reasons I will never understand, to Stranger Things with my boy Eddie. That show was so good. To House of Dragon. Like, there was so many good shows. It felt like it was just every other month, just something amazing was happening. But this award has to go to Andor. I loved this show, and this is coming from somebody who hasn't really been a huge fan of Star Wars for a while, but this is finally a Star Wars story that doesn't rely so heavily on the Jedi and the Stormtroopers and the Skywalkers and all these things that you've already seen before. It just tells its own story, and it does it amazingly well, like so good. And there's some amazing acting from people like Andy Serkis and Stellan Skarsgård, who if neither of them are nominated for Emmys for this, I will be genuinely pissed, because they killed it. That entire prison arc that Andy Serkis is in is so good, and he is the best part of it by far. He's absolutely amazing. I'm so glad that he got another chance to be in Star Wars after being Snoke, because Snoke sucked. Like, I'm sorry, his new character is so much better. And oh my god, the monologues that Stellan Skarsgård gives in this TV show are just so killer. They're so good when he's talking about what he had to give up to join the rebellion. Oh man, I don't even know how to put it into words, because they were so just well spoken and handled every aspect of their performance so well that I don't even know where to begin. I would be talking in circles for hours just talking about how amazing these two people were in this show, and I especially don't want to spoil anything, because god, it is so amazing. It's just so good. When we finally get to that last episode of the season and things start really kicking off, it was one of those situations where I am standing alone in my apartment just screaming at the TV, just like on my feet, like I want to jump in, right? This TV show is the kind of thing that Star Wars desperately needed to break out of the mold that it's in and show the people who are in charge of Star Wars, look, this can be more than what it's been. And I can't wait for season 2 of this. So the next award is going to go to my favorite new podcast of 2022. I work in a warehouse for upwards of 40 hours a week, and I spend a lot of that time listening to podcasts. So I have a wide breadth of things to choose from this year, and I thought about choosing the Xbox Factor podcast because I recently became a permanent panel member on that podcast. Plug. Please go check it out. It's a really good show. But that felt a little too self-serving, so I went for what is actually my favorite new podcast of this year, which is Dungeons and Daddies. Now, hear me out. It's not a BDSM podcast, despite the name. It's a live play D&D podcast about 4 dads from the real world who get sort of sucked into the Forgotten Realms, the land of D&D, when they're taking their kids to a soccer game. So they have to rescue their kids and then find a way out, is basically the overarching story. And it's this really fun thing where they sort of have to ply their real world trades into explaining how they are the classes that they are, and how they think about all the situations, the weird fantastical situations that they find themselves in. And it is primarily a comedy podcast, and they knock that out of the park. It is so funny. I was laughing, I think, every single episode. Especially there's a bit in episode 64 that I specifically wrote down to make a note of. It involves time travel. I won't tell you too much about it. That had me just, oh my god, had me in stitches. It was so good. The prestige on it was just phenomenal. And it's not to say like they only rely on comedy, that it's just like, a laugh a minute the whole time. No, there's some really dramatic, like emotional moments in this podcast that had me genuinely feeling feelings, like when they go into the pyramid, or when they find out who's the big bad, and stuff like that really hits hard, to the point where by the time the theme song hits at the end of campaign 1, I was in tears and had a big dumb smile on my face the whole time. And it was so embarrassing because I was at work at the time, and I didn't want to have to explain to any of my coworkers how a podcast called Dungeons and Daddies had brought me to tears. But it was so good. It's so good. If you have interest in D&D or comedy, or just want a good radio play basically to listen to at work, I highly recommend Dungeons and Daddies. And their second campaign is ongoing right now, where they're playing as the grandchildren of the characters that they played in the first campaign, and it's shaping up to be just as good. So this is a very confident recommendation. The next award is for the best wrestling pay-per-view of 2022. And of course, I didn't watch every single pay-per-view. I really only watched two promotions, that being WWE and AEW, so you can pretty much guarantee it's going to be one of those two, unless New Japan just like really kills it, because I watch some New Japan stuff. Regardless, this award is going to Forbidden Door. I think if you're a wrestling fan, that shouldn't really come as a surprise to you, because Forbidden Door was just so amazing on so many different levels. Because first of all, this is the sort of thing that we as wrestling fans have been dreaming of seeing for so long. Just the idea of seeing two different promotions that are still different promotions owned by different people doing different things coming together to put on one fantastic pay-per-view is basically unheard of. The only other time I can think of this happening was, I guess, when Vince bought WCW back in the day, but even then it was kind of the same promotion at that point because he owned both of them. But this was such an amazing collaboration, even despite the fact that there were a lot of people that had to end up missing the show because of either injury or like weird political stuff going on between different luchador promotions that I would rather not get into. It's a mess. But it was such a good show. It had amazing matches, right? Like, I wrote a couple down here. FTR versus the United Empire versus the reunited Roppongi Vice. Such a killer. Everyone loves a good tag team match, and these are three amazing tag teams. We got to see my boy, the Great Okan, who I love. That dude's a hero, like real world and in fiction. Well, not in fiction. In fiction, he's a heel. But in the real world, he's like kind of a hero. That dude rocks. Thunder Rosa versus Tony Storm. That wasn't one that really took advantage of the cross-promotional thing, but New Japan only recently got a women's division, so they didn't really have anything to offer. But it was still a fantastic match. Darby and Sting and Shingo Takagi versus the Bullet Club of the Young Bucks and El Phantasmo was a match that I thought we would never see. You know, it's basically like the Bullet Club, which is probably one of the most popular factions in Japan, versus these, you know, Sting being one of the most popular people in America, Darby being one of the huge up-and-comer, and then Shingo Takagi being like a personal favorite of mine. I love Shingo Takagi. So good. We had Will Ospreay versus Orange Cassidy, a match that I think on paper a lot of people maybe looked at and was like, oh, that'll be nothing, but it was just killer. Like, Orange really brought it. Like, everyone knew that Will Ospreay was going to be fantastic. He's an asshole, like real world and in fiction, but he's a fucking phenomenal wrestler, and Orange Cassidy brought it. Like, man, if you think Orange Cassidy is still a comedy wrestler, or just a comedy wrestler after that match, I don't know how to help you, because he's so good. We had the debut of Claudio Castagnoli versus Zack Sabre Jr., which is like a dream match. People wanted to see that for years. Zack Sabre Jr. is phenomenal. He's got all these holds and he's wrapping people up, and then Claudio's just this like brawler brute. So good, so good. Then, oh my god, this next one, Jay White versus Adam Page versus Adam Cole versus Kazuchika fucking Okada. I wrote this down in my notes for this, and I still think I might have dreamed this match. Like, this is amazing. The fact that these four people were in the same ring together this year, or last year, I guess, and I got to see it. If someone came up to me and told me that it didn't actually happen, there would be a second where I'd have to think, that I would have to really think to know whether or not it was real, because it is the sort of thing that I would fantasy book, and it's amazing. And then the main event being Jon Moxley versus Hiroshi Tanahashi, Go Ace. It was just such an amazing pay-per-view. So many of those matches are in contention for being the best match of the year, which is not to say, I mean, you know, I don't want to, you know, shit on WWE. They had a lot of good matches too. The one that immediately comes to mind is Cody versus Seth. You know, they've really sort of turned it around since Triple H took over from Vince, who sort of retired this year, although he's talking about coming back. It's a mess. Don't worry about it. If you don't care about wrestling, it's a long story that you probably don't want to hear. But WWE has gotten better in the second half of this year, and I'm hoping that they'll continue that trend into, you know, 2023 and beyond. But man, Forbidden Door, just, I don't think there's even a second pay-per-view that came close to this. If you care about wrestling and you haven't seen this pay-per-view, go and watch it. Even if you don't necessarily care about people from New Japan, this pay-per-view will make you know who they are, and then you'll just want to keep seeing them because they're phenomenal. So this next award is going to go to my favorite new comic book of 2022, and I'm going to have to kind of cheat here a little bit because I don't think this book actually came out in 2022, but I read it for the first time in 2022, so sue me, whatever, it's my list. But this award has to go to Harleen by Stepan Sejic. I'm confident I pronounced his name wrong. But it is both written and drawn, like the art is also done by Stepan Sejic, who, that's, in my experience, I might be wrong, very uncommon, right, for someone to do both the writing and the art for the same comic book, and especially for them to do both of those things and for both of them to be fucking amazing, right? Like, he killed it with this book. I don't know any of his other work, so I don't know if this is a fluke or not, but this one is absolutely amazing. So to tell you more about the actual comic book, this is about the origin story of Harley Quinn, and this is something that we don't really get to see a lot of. A lot of the time when we get sort of stuff about Harley Quinn, she's already Harley, and in the worst case scenario, she's just like a tool or a weapon to be used by the Joker. She doesn't really get a whole lot of characterization on her own. Of course, this isn't true across the board. Like, the animated show that she has, I think, does a really good job of making her character. Even the newer, like the Suicide Squad, does a really good job with her character. Or yeah, a pretty good job with her character. There's only so much you can do at a certain point. But regardless, this is amazing, right? To get to see Harley before she's Harley, to get her to see her as just Harleen, the psychiatrist, and have her, you know, talk about her research and what she's getting into, and then to see that start to build the relationship between her and the Joker and see how that happened, and to see her slowly sort of fall into insanity while, you know, she's a psychiatrist, so she knows that she's slipping into insanity, and she knows that she's getting worse and worse every day. And it's this really powerful, like, introspective story about, like, yes, I'm losing my mind, but I'm also in love. So it's like this, it's this like push and pull of like, is this right, is this wrong? And it's handled very, very well. It just incredibly well. I cannot stress enough how much I really love the way that this story is written, and not just for Harley Quinn. I actually think that this is also probably one of my favorite Two-Face origin stories, even though it happens like kind of in the background. The story arc that he gets in here is also really powerful. There's a couple of scenes between specifically Harleen and Harvey Dent that I think are amazing. If you've read it, the one where he's telling her about his coin, I think is extremely well handled and just very good. And the thing that I really, really want to talk about, so I pushed it off, is that the art of this book is so good. Everyone is so hot, like just really attractive, which I guess is probably a Stepan Sejic sort of trope. From what I've seen of his other art, he does tend to make people just like really hot. But I'm here for it. If it's a romance story, which this kind of is, like, absolutely, give them all abs. I don't even care. And just the way he lays out the page, the design elements of it are stunning. I'm going to just put pictures up and just let you be the judge of it. But it's the artwork that he does for this book is phenomenal from page 1 to page 101. I don't know how many pages there are. And it's to the point where, and I know there's not a ton of competition for this, but for me, this is the definitive Harley Quinn story. If you like that character, read this book and you will fall in love with her. And in the same vein as Harleen, the next award is for the best new to me game of 2022. This is an award dedicated specifically to games that did not come out in the year that the award is for, but that I played for the first time in 2022. We'll have the actual game of the year after this. But for me, and this is maybe going to be a groaner for some people, for me, the best game that I played this year that did not come out this year was Red Dead Redemption 2. I put this game off for so long. I think I owned this game physically since the day it came out, or like shortly after, maybe the following Christmas or something. Like, I've owned it for a long time, and I just put off playing it for years and years and years. Because, first of all, I was hearing a lot of really mixed things. Some people were saying it's really boring, it's really slow, and it is really slow, but I think it handles it really well. Anyway, And I've also had been hearing, that it's super, super long, which it is. I think I put like probably 200 or 300 hours into this thing. But I heavily enjoyed the vast majority of those hours. And that's coming from me, right? I'm somebody who, if you don't know this about me, I hope this isn't a deal breaker for you. I typically don't like Rockstar games. I didn't really care for Grand Theft Auto 4 or 5. I liked the PS2 ones, but they were sort of a different thing back then, where it was just, I'm just going to screw around in this sandbox. The story of 4 and 5 just really didn't do anything for me. And even Red Dead 1, I really didn't care for. I thought it was, honestly, thought it was all the things that people say when they talk negatively about Red Dead 2. I thought it was slow. I thought it was boring. I didn't really care about any of the characters. But none of that is true for Red Dead 2. This is the first Rockstar game that has really hit me, and it hit me really hard. I love this game, right? The fidelity is phenomenal. It's something that hasn't been achieved before or since, right? Just everyone looks amazing. The way the landscape looks is like almost photorealistic. And I don't even normally care that much about like if something looks photorealistic. I actually tend to prefer like a nice art style in my games because they hold up better over time. But I can't imagine how this isn't going to hold up because it looks real. And I don't know, maybe 10 years from now I'll look back on this video and think I'm an idiot because there'll be something like, I don't know, Red Dead 3 will be out and it'll be 500% better. But this is the most real, alive, breathing world I think I've ever set foot in a video game, right? It's you talk about the wildlife and how they're doing real things. Like you can see a wolf just like take down a deer and then drag it off. You can see these animals living in the biomes that they would actually live in. You see people having normal jobs and going about their lives. Like the blacksmith will go and, hammer out some horseshoes, and you'll see the stable guy, brushing horses, and the gunsmith is doing like every single thing in this world feels like it's very specifically placed with intention and belongs there. It almost doesn't even feel like a game that's been crafted. It feels like it's a world that we're being allowed to glimpse into. And I know that sounds incredibly pretentious, and it is, but that's really how I feel about this game. Is it's really, really phenomenal. I love the different areas in this game, from all the way up in the mountains with the deep snow down to the city of Saint Denis is probably my favorite city in video games. It looks so good. The aesthetic of it is just like chef's kiss. I love it. Every aspect of this game is just so realized, even like the different mechanics of it, right? From hunting to sort of handling your home base to the bounty system, like everything feels really good. And I still have my gripes with it, right? It still has like not very good shooting like all Rockstar games do, but the Deadeye feature really helps alleviate that. I had a lot of trouble getting my camp to actually set up because it would be like, you can't set up a camp here because the ground's uneven, or you're too close to this or whatever, and like that got annoying sometimes. And like I really hated the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a point where you do the thing and then the game kind of ends and there's like a epilogue, and I think the epilogue sucks ass. I just think it's really bad. And also the bit that happens right at the end before the epilogue I feel like is very unsatisfying, not because it's a bad ending or like a sad ending, but because it just felt really unsatisfying. I don't want to get into it because this game is really something special, and most people seem to respond better to that ending than I did, so I don't want to just ruin it for people who haven't played it just because I didn't like it. I don't know, that's just me. This game, absolutely phenomenal. Even if you're not a Rockstar fan, because I wasn't, this game I think has a very high potential of bringing you over, just from how well realized its world is to how lovable so many of its characters are, or hateable some of its other characters are. It's just, this is the game that made me finally understand what people see in Rockstar. And I don't know if I'm going to feel the same way about Grand Theft Auto 6, because I feel like maybe this period piece style is more interesting to me on a personal level, but it's definitely going to make me at least try Grand Theft Auto 6, and I don't know if I would have before. And now it's time for the big one. That's right, this one's for all the nothing I'm giving out this year. It is my favorite game of 2022, and I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's Elden Ring. it had to be Elden Ring. You've heard it from pretty much everyone else, and now you're going to hear it from me. This is one of the best games of all time. This is going into my hall of greats of just like my personal favorite video games ever. It's so amazing. I don't even think there was anything this year that came particularly close to it, and I know that there's going to be at least one person in the comments who's like, what about God of War Ragnarok? And like, I did play that and I liked it for the most part, but it is not as good as Elden Ring. I'm sorry. You know, the Souls games have always been some of my favorite, and this takes that formula and just evolves it in such an amazing way and applies it to this open world incredibly well. And so many other games have tried to make the jump to open world and just completely fumbled it, and FromSoft nailed it. Like, it was absolutely stellar. I mean, what can I say? This has some of the best boss fights in video games. Like, hands down, right? Some of the best boss fights in Souls for sure, right? You've got Millennia, you've got Godfrey / Horalu, you've got Radagon the Elden Beast, you've got Malekith the Blackblade, you've got Starscourge Radahn and the whole like Radahn festival. Phenomenal, just so good. Some of the most memorable, palpable video game memories I think I've made, maybe in all time, for sure this year. This is a game that is built for people who want to explore a world, right? And it is so good at that in a way that so few other games are, right? When you enter a new area and the map expands and you're like, oh my god, this game is so much bigger than I thought it was, and then you take an elevator down and you find that there's an entire underground world underneath the already massive map that you've been filling out this whole time, and you go, oh my god, this game is so big, am I ever gonna finish this, oh my god. To, you know, and all of those areas are so much fun to explore, right? Like, they feel so distinct and incredibly thought out. You've got, you know, the Academy of Raya Lucaria, the Halig Tree, which is probably my favorite area in the game, and it's one that you can completely miss, right? To Nokron, to Stormvale Castle, to Fair Mazula, to Lindell. Like, the aesthetic on show in this game is beyond compare. It is so good and so on point that it needs to be experienced. If you have not played Elden Ring, please, for the love of God, go play Elden Ring. If you don't like Souls game and you come out and you didn't like it and you're mad at me because I recommended it to you, you can come back and tell me that I'm an idiot, and I'll take it. But I guarantee the majority of people are going to love this game because it is that good. And I know a lot of people really were kind of down on it because they felt like the story of it was sort of non-existent, and maybe it's because I'm a Souls fan, so I'm like used to the way that Souls games handle their story, but it's a story that isn't spoon-fed to you like how so many other games are. This is a game where you're not being guided, you're not being told where to go, the camera's not being controlled to show you the most cinematic set piece that they can show you. It's your experience. When I played this game, the number one thing that I got out of it was being able to go and talk to my friends and being like, did you find this? Did you do that? And they'd be like, no. Did you find this and that? And I'd be like, no, because this game is so amazing. It's so huge. There's so many things to just discover and find and just experience in this game. And that's something that, you know, since the advent of the internet is so hard to get in video games. To exist in the internet age and still have water cooler moments where you're talking to people about things that they never knew were even in the game when they could have so easily Googled it is really commendable, and I love that about this game. And the story is one of those things where they're not going to tell you like, hey, this character did this and then this happened, and like you're going to watch this cutscene of this guy stabbing this up. Like, it's not going to be that, right? It's going to be, you walk into an area and you kind of have to be a little bit of a detective and like see, okay, well, this is over here and that means this. Like, okay, one of the examples that comes to mind is very early in the game when you're heading south, there's a castle that's been overrun by these like beast men, and you find a girl who's sitting on the side of the road blind, and she says, you know, something about, oh, they ran me out of the castle, and they, you know, were picking off my people one by one. And then you walk down the street a little bit further and you see where her caravan was attacked, and then you can see like, here are the beastmen who are doing this, and they didn't attack the giant because the giant is sort of also in servitude like they were. And then like you piece these things together and it becomes this amazing world where like it feels very so real, because you're not gonna walk into a world and have everyone be like, and in the fourth age, it doesn't work like that. It feels like every single thing is placed with a purpose, and that's one of my most favorite things in video games, is just set design, where you go into a location and every single thing means something. Every single thing is in that room because it had to be in that room, or because it makes sense for it to be in that room, right? So powerful. Elden Ring is and it's an amazing game. This is a game that should be studied by future game devs. It is that good, and that's why it is the best game of 2022. Hands down. So those are all my favorite things of 2022, and I'd love to hear what your favorite things of 2022 were down in the comments below. Is there a really great album that I missed out on? A TV show that you think I might not have watched? An anime? A video game? Anything. I want to hear all your recommendations for your favorite things that you did last year in the comments down below. Just fill me with positivity and recommendations. I love just experiencing things that I would have never heard about otherwise. If you want to hear more about me talking about Elden Ring, you can find a video in the description of this video where me and my friend Frank talk about Elden Ring for upwards of an hour. I didn't want to rehash everything we said in that video here because it was an hour long. But if you want a more in-depth conversation, that video does exist for you, and it'll be in the comment or the description down below. If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel. We're on the work up to 1,000 subscribers, and I would really love to get there before the end of this year. Hopefully by my birthday would be even better. And until next time, I'll see you around.